ask anybody's question but yours. You're an idiot. And really a disloyal person.
Really picked a great week for Syracuse fans to remember that Johnny Manziel exists.
Hey.
Welcome, everyone, to the Disloyal Idiots podcast here on the Fans First Sports Network. Christian Guzman, alongside Andy Predator, Steve Howler, will join us shortly as Syracuse fans still try to wrap their minds around using the substitution process to deceive the defense. The funniest part about that whole thing is that I found it really funny that because of that, Pena received an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty for it. It wasn't just like a different random penalty. But it's like the series of like the one of the two that gets you to disqualification, essentially the yellow card in soccer.
It was funny to me because as it was happening, like I was in the stadium and saw it transpiring and was like, oh my goodness, this is absolutely fantastic. Like, what a great touchdown, what a great trick play that they must have ran. And then it got called back and they didn't really show the replay in the stadium. And so a friend who was sitting next to me found the play on Twitter, shows me the play on Twitter. And at first I was like going back in the Slack channel being like, that can't be. And then nope, that is a very illegal thing that he did. They actually specifically, if you're wondering, like, yes, there is a very specific rule that specifically says if you are trying to deceive the defense with a substitution, you are not allowed to do so. How the unsportsmanlike part of it is the funny part, but again, it's a very specific rule. Now, where I was going with this, and again, I'm sad Steve isn't on here to talk about because we can get to a really nitty-gritty football rules conversation about this. But I wonder if instead of having Pena just stand around on the sideline talking to the coach and making it really obvious that he's trying to deceive the defense, if he just gets set, like he sprints like he's going to get a substitution, but then gets set in formation, and then they run the play, I feel like that's legal, because that's the whole issue with that I have with the deception part of this is where, look, he's never really set. He's in a long continuous motion, and he's never actually set. Which again, I think that this is the right idea. The execution just needs some work here. But obviously, there's a very specific rule in the rule book that says do not try to deceive people with substitutions, very specifically.
You remember last year when all the social media channels were comparing the Garrett Schrader fake handoff into the Peyton Manning bootleg rollout, and every single social media page was like comparing the two plays against from the Purdue game. I feel like a lot of people, even though it wasn't as high profile of a game, missed an opportunity to compare that with the Johnny Manziel play that was so famous from when he was with the Browns, because it's literally the exact same thing, because you see Fran point immediately once the ball is snapped.
Yeah,
it turned out like it looks the exact same. It's just on the opposite sideline.
Yeah, exactly. I was just remarkably stunned by the entire thing that was transpiring, and I think again, look, this is the reason we're talking about this is because this is probably the most interesting thing that happened in a game where Kyle McCord set the single game passing record. Cemented himself as one of the best single season. Well, yeah. That's single game. There we go.
He set the single season passing record, but didn't quite get to the single game passing record yet.
Yes, there we go. And like, look, they should have played UConn better. UConn, to their credit, has stuck around and is a better team than we're used to seeing, and they took advantage of things that Syracuse did poorly. But I don't know if there's like anything else when we're talking about was this game interesting that I can really talk about other than this weird illegal unsportsmanlike conduct, illegal motion penalty.
Well, what I will say is that for a lot of detractors, because again we are part of the Syracuse fan base, and there are certainly detractors who, much like me in previous seasons, did not have a shred of optimism in their bones would be really disappointed about this game. And there are reasons to be disappointed in this game. Like Andy said, you probably should have beaten UConn by a more comfortable margin. The amount of times where I'm looking at the stat sheet and wondering to myself, how is this still a one possession game, was a little bit too much for me and my taste, considering that this is a Syracuse team that thoroughly outplayed this UConn team. But it just goes back to, again, some of the similar topics that we've talked about Syracuse, which is, like we've talked about also in previous podcasts, issues that we're confident that with time, Fran Brown and his coaching staff will eventually fix. And that goes back all the way to the NC State game where Fran was talking about how his team still had a losing mentality. And it felt like there were some aspects of that in this game, not necessarily maybe off the field stuff, but definitely on field stuff when you're committing penalties that take you out of, scoring opportunities. Like Trevor Pena had 2 touchdowns called back because of penalties. One of them was quote unquote his own fault, but there were many ways where Syracuse should have put away this game more, which is something that has been a topic of conversation for Syracuse this entire season. But we're now at that point where you hear this a lot from people. If that's your biggest worry, you probably have it pretty good, which is probably where we are right now with this Syracuse team. If we're talking about why didn't they win more, especially, let's put it into context. Is it a UConn team that Syracuse should beat? Yes, but this is a UConn team that was pretty competitive against 2 other ACC programs, and Syracuse certainly showed that they could, take it to the Huskies when needed, and take it and essentially, play their game.
Yeah, and I think that there's an interesting thing to kind of talk about here in the sense that, like, look, if you are somebody like me that maybe had a vested interest in Syracuse hitting their season over win total, it happened in this game. Like you said, Christian, this was an overall, by all stretches of the imagination, whether it's Vegas, whether it's you're a fan, this game cemented that this season is unquestionably more successful than the average expectation of this team. But I think this game did show what has held Syracuse back from going to that next step of being consistent enough as a team to not drop that game against Stanford, to be more competitive against Pitt. And that was, once again, general sloppiness in the execution on both sides of the ball. For example, wrap up a guy on 4th and 1 on the when you are defending on the opposite side of the field. Like, it's really not that hard to do. I say as somebody who has never actually tackled somebody before, but the again, like, we've seen that happen in various forms this season, and whether it was in a 4th and 1 spot versus a first and 10, tackling has been a consistent issue on defense. Meanwhile, on the offensive side of the ball, I thought that the offensive line performed better, but there were a few times where UConn really, there's either a cue or there's either they know a certain look where they're able to just rush guys and get into the backfield untouched with while still being able to drop multiple guys back there. So there's something, and that's been something we've seen multiple times this season. It's something that happens in football. Like, I'm not saying that it's perfect, but if you want to be an upper echelon tier, like, those are the things that you don't let happen consistently, and they have happened consistently for Syracuse. So I just think that, like, when you look at this game, a win is a win. Going to take it. Syracuse, with this win, over exceeds all expectations that we had on them. But this game was really a microcosm for, well, why do some fringe fans feel frustrated and keep talking about the Stanford game or the BC game or the Pitt game? And it's because in all 3 of those games, and much like in Syracuse's wins, the issue has not been Syracuse is not talented, not schematically up to it. It's been a question of execution at the player level. Hi, Steve.
And as Steve joins us here now, after his family time has completed, I will say that the only person that probably was maybe quote unquote not wanting a Syracuse win is probably me, and maybe to some lesser extent Andy, because this probably removes Syracuse from playing a Northeast Bowl that I could attend in person.
Don't say that yet, because we can go into the bowl selection stuff, but if you read any of the reports that came out at the end of last year's bowl selection day, it sure seems like the ACC does not really know what it's doing when it comes to bowl selection.
You could have just stopped.
Yeah.
That sentence. Yeah, no, it's going to be weird to see where this all lines up, because we also, when you look at the ACC, everybody decided to have the same record.
Yeah,
and it's really not going to help anybody's decision making on this when it normally sucks anyways. So it's not making anybody's life easier.
Carson posted, I think it was an ESPN prediction in our Slack chat that had Syracuse currently where it is right now. One expert predicting Syracuse to the Pinstripe Bowl to play against Minnesota, which just would be really, really funny.
The battle for Nick Monroe supremacy.
Exactly, the battle for Nick Monroe. PJ Fleck, we're coming for you again.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That game, I don't know what you guys touched on, because I'm later than I anticipated being. I'd assume a good bit of it, but that seemed like a very weird game, which we've seen a couple times this year, where we were by far the better team, and we 100% were in control of that game for most of it, and somehow we still came down to a one possession game, which, if you for anyone who's interested, go check out our Discord. There's been some great conversations in there. There's also some really entertaining conversations in there, which Andy is now caught up on. But the one of the things that came up was people complaining about playing that prevent defense, and it's like, we're up 2 scores late in the fourth. We weren't even playing a prevent. We were playing over with basically letting them have the under, which was letting the 12th man run and letting that clock just bleed out. We weren't going to give up any big play. We weren't going to give up any score, but they were dinking and dunking in the middle of the field without any timeouts left. Why wouldn't we just let them eat the entire clock up? That was a calculated maneuver. That wasn't prevent defense is failing. This is like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Let's go. And it worked.
Yeah, it was exactly the same as the Georgia Tech game. That's what Syracuse went to against the Yellow Jackets, and would have succeeded with with a far better result that would make Syracuse fans more comfortable if the onside kick was not botched by the Syracuse recovery team, unfortunately, during that Georgia Tech game. Yeah. This game, it worked, albeit it took Amari Hatcher's knee to get sacrificed in order for it to get work. But other than that,
some blood for the blood god there. That was that was so unfortunate. Watching that, I was like, I don't know, because I was in the dome, much like you, Christian, and I couldn't tell what the hell happened. I just saw the med team out there, and that was the point where with a 7-year-old and getting rid of, we had 27 scouts at the game. So I was wrangling 74 people, including running down into the annals of the dome to get them out onto the field for the flag ceremony. So it was an exciting day at the dome for me, and nothing to do with football. But that was, the 7-year-old made it that far. And at that point, we're like, they're going to kneel it. We're leaving. So didn't even get to, see what came of, seeing Hatcher down, and that was about it. So to hear it after the fact, it was like, oh boy.
Yeah, no, it took a big effort to get him off the field.
Yeah,
which was definitely not a great sign.
Yeah.
But Steve, to recap on what you missed, we did basically spend 50% of the game. It was 50% of this talking about, Syracuse probably should have won that game by more, but oh well, execution. Fran can fix that. And the other 50% talking about using the substitution process to deceive the defense.
We literally used to have a trick play that did exactly that. Like one of our fake punts at Union was literally one of the guys ran to the sideline as if they were subbing off and then stayed inside, checked with the linesman, and then took off. And then we would pass the ball to the open guy. That was literally a fake play we had. I don't know if the flag was thrown because he didn't check in with the linesman, or because in the replay you see him talking to the coach. I don't know if he ever got acknowledgement from the ref that he was live, and that may have been your issue.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, is that I was telling Christian, there is specifically a rule that says you are not allowed to deceive via subs, and that's why it's unsportsmanlike conduct and not a illegal motion or illegal shift. That was a big topic of conversation in our section.
Right.
But if he just sets,
right, if he turns and sets upfield and gets his am I on the line, off the line from the linesman, that's a perfectly legal maneuver.
Yeah, right. And then even then, like if you set, you don't have to check in with the linesman. Now you're playing with fire at that point.
Right.
That's why everybody always checks in with the linesman. But
Mhm.
again, like the Bones, I think actually putting a giant bow on this entire conversation, much like Syracuse this season, really great idea, really innovative, and trying to do something new that we haven't really done in a long time. Calling it when they called it would have really kind of broken that game open for the Orange. And yet the execution is at a level where you go, there's still a little bit more for us to go before we have that level of like, oh, we're kicking on all cylinders and we can do something here.
Right. We're 8-4, 8-3, and we haven't played a full game yet.
Yeah.
Like last week was probably the closest thing we came, and we still had plenty of issues.
You know who hasn't played a full game yet either?
Red
Autry's team.
Yeah.
Oh, another team I saw this week in person.
Yeah, you and me both, Andy. Let's talk about let's talk about the Jekyll and Hyde that was the first and second half.
Wait
of
a
Syracuse,
minute.
Texas.
Hold on. How did I miss you in the dome?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I was there with a couple of UConn people and my old college friends, and had started consuming libations at I think 9 a.m.
I was at an official Scouts function, so I was dry as can be. So that works out.
Yeah,
that would have been great if Andy popped up to the Scouts section. Hey guys, how you doing?
As I told Steve in our Slack channel, I set my alarm. I set my alarm for 7:30. I'm like, okay, it's 7:30. I'm still a little bit tired because I just drove back from Brooklyn.
Right.
Let me catch a shut eye for 5 minutes and then start with my preparations for today. After that shut eye for 5 minutes, I open my phone and it says 9:30, and I'm like, oh crap.
Yeah. Also, yeah, I guess that's something to touch on. This is the first time I'd seen the pregame stuff.
Yeah.
Like the walk and
whatnot.
That was awesome. Like that was great to see. Like I'm glad that they're doing that. Like my son got to like I think I sent you guys pictures of him like high-fiving Barron and Pena, and like the probably about 40 of the guys. He's just sitting there. Like I was talking to Tyler and just set up right at the start of the thing, and Sebastian's just sitting there like high-fiving all these guys, and it was great. The entire quad was hyped up and cheering for these guys, and the band was going at Hendricks and the whole nine. Even for a relatively, dare I say, dismal day to start, it was there was a decent energy there, and it worked out quite well. Like I will give credit to SU coordination for what they did on the quad pregame. It went right from that into mill around for a little bit, and then the drum line, and then the band, and then you're in.
Yeah. On that note, the Mirren Victory Court.
Yes.
Yeah, I didn't make it down there. How was that?
That I was with a bunch of people that graduated in 2015. Some of them have not been to campus since 2015, and everyone some levels of variety. So mostly, we're walking past all the new buildings. Everybody's like, "What the heck is this? This is way different than when we were here." As one happens,
it's like it was built in the past 6 months.
Exactly. Well, we show up at at the Victor, we actually, our tickets said to go in because we were sitting in 251. So that was actually gate P was the gate that we were supposed to go in, which is the new court entrance, and was stunned. At the end of the day, I'm going to say this. It is a very, very, very nice tent that they have thrown over a connecting two different buildings that are next to each other. Like, for all intents and purposes, it's a giant open space. It doesn't have a whole lot. But what they did for the game is they have installed massive floor-to-ceiling LED boards that had the game on, like the Syracuse game, using the feed that they have at all the concession stands. So it's only a few seconds behind the live action happening behind you. They also had taken several smaller squares and put on all of the other games that were taking place around the country that are on ESPN or on national TV. So essentially you end up with the world's biggest quad box that's just on a wall.
Right.
And then they had multiple grab and grow craft beer stations with a full service walk-up bar, and then tons of standing of bar seat, no seats, but standing room bar tables.
Oh, like a high top. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. And so what you end up with is essentially pregame the quickest way to get a non Bud Light, Miller Light, if you want something nice. They had multiple of them. You grab and go. The students are running it quickly because it's just show the ID and swipe a card. And then at halftime, that became just the spot to hang out at halftime. And so I saw a friend there who said the new move is buy a cheap ticket to get in the door and then just hang out there for the game.
Oh, and there you go.
I think that is a viable strategy if you are one of these people that's like, oh, I don't know if I want to go and walk all the way up, to the top level of my spot. If you're down to stand around, that is an amazing standing room only area to both watch the game, still be part of the Dome experience, but also, be in the building for relatively cheap.
Yeah, and I think, Christian, I don't know if you saw it, but I think Pete had an interview where he was discussing that sometime earlier this week, and basically saying that they designed it to be kind of modular like that, where they can do that, or they can shut parts of it off, or they can close it down, make it bigger, smaller, like scale it to the size of the event happening and what's going on there. So that, it's like you said, I didn't see it in person, but from what I can gather, it's going to be a nice little space to have there.
One of the things that I think is really obvious with the way that it's kind of built is that if you wanted to, say, for instance, have a bunch of high school recruits come up for a game and have a private area where they can meet with Coach Fran before the game, and then you shuttle him back down into the level without anybody noticing or seeing, that kind of area is perfect for it, since it connects to the rest of the Syracuse, since it still connects to both the Dome and to the Barnes Center, which is obviously one of the jewels of the new student experience available on campus.
And I'm not sure how much you guys paid attention to it, but as usual, especially now since we're getting to that point of year, that sideline pregame was packed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And we saw a commit come out of it already. So we got a 2026 track star cornerback that committed, Jackson
Gates. He committed to the University of Syracuse, though, so not quite
point. Yet. All right, we'll wait till the next bye week, and then we can claim him.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got it's a 26 recruit on top of everything. So why not? There's more bodies in the building than we've ever seen, and if it's going to start paying dividends, then even better.
And Fran has said, I think, in one of his ESPN Syracuse radio interviews in the past couple of weeks, it was either this past week or the week before, that, just given, how they've been building this class, they're going to look to weigh more heavily and rely more on the high school recruiting to give them, their talent that they need, less so on the transfer portal like they did last year. So, and again, you're up to 30 recruits already in the class of 2025, or the class of 2025. That's going to suck for all of us when we've got to try and figure out how we're going to divvy up how many recruits we're going to write on signing day.
There you
but
go.
at the same time, like that's where we've mentioned this a billion times on this podcast already. When's the last time Syracuse was in this good of a position recruiting wise with their recruits in the modern day and age?
So
Yeah.
I just had an epiphany.
Just real quick,
Epiphany.
Steve, just to kind of back up Steve's point or back up Christian's point with actual data. Syracuse right now, 36th overall recruiting class in the country, according to 24/7 composite. Like, we spent all of last offseason when Fran got hired looking at Steve's spreadsheet, marveling at how Fran had basically done something that had never been done at Syracuse before, and he's now done it the exact next season. Like, I think this is going to be a continued like that. Last year was not a exception. That is the rule.
For the record, my spreadsheet died not from a lack of anything, but for the sheer well, I think Mike's actually been playing around with it, but I stopped updating it because there was not for any reason other than there was too much data. I could not keep up with it. I was like, it got to the point where it was so outdated. I'm like, I just can't.
Don't you have 26 Cub Scouts that you could employ for that now?
Yeah, that'll be the next pack meeting is updating spreadsheets on Syracuse football recruits. So I kind of had, I guess it isn't completely true, but we have the 36th ranked class. Some of that is because of number. Like, there's a high volume of recruits we have. Am I, or would I be remiss to say that Fran seems to a degree, be looking at using the recruiting as finding his diamonds in the rough, and then using his portal to fortify with known commodities? And that seems like that might be a pretty damn good option moving forward, especially when you can sell, hey, we had a transfer quarterback come in and he just set every record in the Syracuse passing playbook, outside of a single game passing record, unfortunately, by a total of 12 yards.
Okay, so Christian, I was close.
Yeah, you were close. But again, like every single one of us in press row are like drafting the tweet for when McCord breaks that record.
Oh, I told the guy that was sitting next to me, I was like, if we get the ball back, I'm pretty sure Fran's going to throw it once just to see if he can get it. Like, he seems like that kind of coach too, of like,
yeah,
if he knows he's that close, he's going to give him one just to, like, it, that way it's on him and not on Fran making the decision too. Especially when it, wouldn't be pertinent. But yeah, I had the conversation with a couple of people too about having McCord come in and have this sort of season almost drastically changes what you can do in the portal, because you can sell something completely different. You can sell, hey, come here, we'll take, yes, McCord was a quality lauded quarterback, but you're not happy at, Michigan, you're the backup there, come on over, we got a spot for you. You aren't happy down at Texas, or you're Georgia's second string, hey, why not? Like, we can make you fit, we can make you look good.
Well, and Fran's also showing that he's willing to play freshmen.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen it. Like, let's take a look on the offensive side. We've seen Emmanuel Ross, get some good run. You've seen Willis has gotten great run on the defensive side. If opportunities open your way, you're going to get there. Murad Watson is started the season as a second stringer, now essentially a first stringer on the defensive line. And given the opportunity
in without the injuries, so
exactly. And and now, even though this has helped with injuries and unavailability, Davian Kerr has stepped in.
Yep.
And we saw it last week. This week, maybe had a rough first half, but turned it around in the second half. So, like, you've got players who are getting opportunities. Some by merit and some by opportunity. And Fran is showing that if you put in the work, he'll give you that opportunity, which is good for the recruits, especially the commits that are showing up.
Well, and also in today's day and age, like, one of the things that is also really important is it's not just about what you do your freshman year, it's about what you do your sophomore year, because we're seeing that sophomore, junior year tilt is really where the majority of the transfer portal is going. And so when you look at Syracuse and you go, man, what is Syracuse going to do next year when we don't have a Rondé Gadsden, we don't have Trebor Pena, we don't, Jackson Meeks, another senior. What are we going to do with this passing game? We're going to need to hit the portal. Well, Daryl Gill here as a sophomore comes in and has a career game and shows like, okay, the cupboard's not going to be completely bare here. And it's these kinds of games, I know that a lot of people give the SEC crap for SoCon Saturday, which is, this week when they're all playing cupcakes. That's kind of the point of, and why I'd like to see Syracuse get more creative if the ACC is going to ask us to play non-conference game or play conference games in September. Schedule more games like this in November, because it does allow you to say, I've had basically a full season with you as a freshman or a sophomore to get practices, play against the ones and the twos in drills. Now we're going to give you game time, and we're going to see if this is somebody that I can count on for next season when I'm in a position to now go and figure out what do I need to supplement, what is my priority here. And I think that, Christian, when you're talking about what can Fran pitch to a younger player to make him want to stay at Syracuse instead of transfer out and go somewhere else, this is all part of that equation. And we realize that Fran, the recruiting was not just getting guys in the door, it was the managing of that entire experience and what needs to be done in order to be a quote unquote players coach in the portal era.
I should have known better than for us to know that a relatively simple football game to talk about would cost us the first half of the podcast, because that's I should have known better.
I mean, and look, we all should have known that Home Field was going to blow it out for Black Friday weekend here.
You
Home
didn't
Field
know
Apparel. Home Field Apparel, sponsor of the show, makers of fine vintage clothing, including the t-shirt that Steve is wearing that is Syracuse themed, the more neutral streetwear branded shirt that I am wearing that is a long sleeve, and we're in long sleeve season. I'm so happy. Also have one of their koozies here. They make a lot of things. They're all comfortable. They're all great. And now we are in our Black Friday season. Their Home Field Black Friday sale started on the 22nd, and it runs all the way until Tuesday, December 3rd. So you've got plenty of time to use their biggest sale to date, 30% off the entire site. Yes, that's 30% off of everything, including snapbacks, dad hats, coaching jackets, bomber jackets, whatever they have. It is 30% off with the code BFCM24. That's BFCM24 for 30% off the entire site until Tuesday, December 3rd. Make sure that you go and check out there. They've published a Home Field holiday guide that you can find over on X, Blue Sky, and Instagram on their social media channels, kind of walking through their entire line of apparel. That in case you're looking for some gifts, I might have wrapped up some Home Field Christmas presents for my family here back in Erie, Pennsylvania that I had shipped here. So great time of year to go to Home Field. Give someone you care about some really quality clothing.
If you miss it by December 3rd, you still have a chance for a pretty decent deal with, I believe, 20% off with the code Noons24 if it's your first order. So if for some ungodly reason you can't take advantage of that, take advantage of our promo code as well, because it helps the algorithm, because words are hard.
Words are hard. You know what also is hard? Playing a full basketball game if you're wearing the Syracuse Orange jersey.
Ain't that the truth?
To be fair, Eddie Lampkin played one and then died about 3 minutes into the second.
That is a man who you look at him and you go, back-to-backs and short rest in the tournament are not going to be your friend if we get there. Which at this point, don't know if we're going to get there. But that we should probably talk about. Tournament. I don't even know about that one, Steve.
There's like CBI and stuff.
You think Syracuse is accepting a CBI invitation?
I feel like it's been so long that we should do something.
I don't disagree there, but we have to talk to Red about that. We also talk about Red about his player management and some other things that went through in back-to-back nights at Barclays Center. Syracuse drops 2 games to the state of Texas. losing both games, though, to be fair. Syracuse covered the point spread. They did not get beat as bad as everybody thought that they should. So moral victory there. The bad side of it is that means that Syracuse had a chance to win both of these games, but in both games had stretches of play that essentially eliminated them from this contest, and put them in a bad spot. For the Texas game, it was a absolutely horrific start that I was watching in person and losing my mind against. And I was texting Christian about how bad the defense was, that when they played zone, I think I sent Christian a text in all caps and was incredulous. The Texas Tech game, I did not get to watch because I was in transit to Syracuse. So I'll rely a little bit more on Christian for your feedback.
I was also, so all our hopes here lie on Steve.
I saw the first half.
Okay, great. That's better than nothing.
No, I did see that one.
Yeah, that was Friday night.
I don't know. This whole weekend just blends into each other.
Yeah, it turns out that being around 75 small children will do that.
Yeah, the text that Andy sent to me in all caps was, "Did we switch to zone?" And I tweeted and I texted back to him, "You bet your ass we did," in all caps.
There you go.
So yeah,
random question from the weekend or from anything. Christian, you may be our only hope on this. Do either Kyle Cuff or why is my brain blanking?
Chance Westry?
Yes. Do they exist?
Jury out.
Okay, cool. Because we could have used some guards.
This is a point that Kevin brings up a lot when those two names are brought up. And I agree with the point that Kevin makes. Are they actually going to solve Syracuse's problems by playing them?
No, but they're bodies that could try something different.
I don't think it's going to be that drastically different.
Well, I guess I'm curious. Jaquan Carlos starting at the point is an experiment. He has shown things. He looks like a player that can dribble a basketball and distribute to a degree. I don't know if he's what we were expecting. I don't know if he's the answer, but he's there.
Well, the problem is that what he showed was again in the exhibition.
Right. But in all 5 of the regular season games, what he showed was not there.
Exactly.
Yeah. Becomes a bit of an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that a function of what he's doing, or is that a function of somebody seeing tape on him and saying, "Oh, I can fix that," and him not adjusting? Or all of the above?
Who knows?
Steve, you're asking some great questions here.
Jair Davis looks fine. Well, looked fine against Texas. Looked less fine against Tech. I don't know. I don't have any major analysis for either of these games, but they existed.
I think my biggest concern, the team has the same issues that it did last year with a much different group, where defensively the level of commitment that is needed in man-to-man just doesn't seem to be there. And
it seems better than last year.
It does. But then this year, the issue is you add on what seems to be a level of not knowing where to be and not knowing how to handle more than 3 passes, or anybody who sets up for an ISO, which, is not exactly what you want. And then, which again, to the zone question, you're taking a team that's showing that they're having issues with the mental side of defense, and you're asking them to play a defensive system that is predicated on making smart decisions.
Basketball IQ is not this team's strong point, it seems.
Yes.
And ball movement weirdly is.
Yes.
I've been pleasantly. I haven't seen a Syracuse basketball team move the ball like this in a good long time.
And that brings me to my point, which is what I think I've learned the most about this Syracuse team this weekend, is that, as we saw, Syracuse can stay in games. Yes, there might be some rough stretches, but Syracuse can stay in games. They can turn it on and, if necessary, make the adjustments in order to get back into games. If they're going to win, Chris Bell needs to hit his threes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We talked about earlier in the season who is going to be your alpha player. Starling and Lampkin are nice to have, but Chris Bell has to be a factor from three. And he's missed way too many, not just contested looks, but way too many open looks this year.
Yeah, he was 2 of
Syracuse
6
have a
on
chance.
2 of 6 on Thursday, 3 of 8 on Friday.
And he started
Which-
3 of 4.
Right. I was going to say Friday, what I had seen of him was him looking good. And then I looked at the box score the next morning and I was like, oh, he didn't make a shot after I turned that off. So yeah, that's definitely a piece of the puzzle that needs to improve. Speaking of improving, we have an extremely highly rated power forward that is on our roster.
I talked to him. It was fun to talk to him.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Like, seems like a great interview.
Yeah.
Is he like? Is it the transition? Is it how we're using him? What's going on with Donnie?
I think it's a combination of both, but more so transition, because I feel like offensively he's getting there, especially against the Texas game. He started to show it offensively that he was getting there. But Red commented about it in the post game against Texas as well, that the finishing is getting there, the offensive game is getting there, the rest of it needs to catch up.
But then the Tech game, he goes 1 of 7 from the field for 5 points.
Yes, that's true. I again didn't see the Tech game, so
Right.
couldn't comment on that.
Yeah, that was it's. I guess the question is how we better utilize him, or how we find a way to get him involved to get some sort of confidence in him, because he came in highly regarded for a reason. Like, he's a talented player.
What's an NBA comparison? You guys might know this better. What's an NBA comparison for a 2-man game down in the post, past or present?
Ooh.
Because Eddie Lampkin, when I talked to him, said that when he views his position, his strengths, what his role is on this team, and what he, personally likes to do, he talked about being a pass-first forward. And so if Eddie and Donnie can continue to develop that relationship, especially when Eddie is thinking pass first when he's in the post, that could, help accelerate his game even more so.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I had this conversation before the Texas Tech game. There are only 3 Syracuse players who have played more than 20 minutes this season, who have a positive BPM, which is box plus minus, which is essentially estimates over 100 possessions. Is this player going to be adding positive points or negative points? So very, very simplified WAR. It's not perfect, but it's a good indication of holistically, are you value adding or are you value subtracting? So EPA, but for basketball players.
Right.
The top player is Jair Davis, and the number 2 player is Eddie Lampkin. JJ Starling is also positive. And then, these guys that we've talked about who have been struggling, Chris Bell, Donnie Freeman, Wakan Carlos, they are all pretty significantly negative. And Christian, to your point, like right now, if you are going to be a value add, if Syracuse is going to extract the most positive value on the basketball court, it's by figuring out how to play a 2-man big game with those 2 guys and allow Starling to facilitate that more, so he's shooting less, because his shooting efficiency is still at a level where he should not be shooting as much as he is, which is why his BPM is as low as it is, even though, he's doing a lot for this team.
Which is why you also need to get Wakan Carlos going, because that's what you brought him into this team to do, to be a facilitator and to take that responsibility away from Starling. And if he is, I don't have the stats pulled up in front of me, but I'm pretty sure he's averaging less than 3 assists per game or something like that.
2.4.
A point guard who you brought in to be a facilitator first, which is what I think a lot of people expected Carlos to be, cannot be averaging 2.4 assists per game.
Well, and that's what we need him to be, because he's not an offensive threat. So he needs to be a pass first guy. And he had 2 dishes on Thursday and 3 dishes on Friday in 21 minutes and 27 minutes, respectively. We do talk, Andy's talking about value add players. I think a value add player that we are going to be very happy with over the next course, not only based on prior Syracuse comparisons, but
Peter Mastrovich.
probably, what's that? Yeah,
Yeah.
I was trying to come up with one more way to set it up, but Mastrovich is going to be utterly great for. He is the stereotypical Central European hustle guy for Syracuse. And
Sam Croston tweeted out, the Kyle McCord quote from the press conference this weekend.
Yeah.
Of it's the best decision I've ever made, when McCord said he, on his, decision to come to Syracuse. Sam tweeted, best caption wins. Immediately went with, and Marek Dolezaj ordered pizza for the first time in New York.
Mastrovich is one of the players with a positive plus minus that has not played enough minutes yet for it to be considered counted.
Yeah, the official.
Yeah. So anyways, to your point, Steve, I think that there's a very, college basketball is not the NBA. A guy who's going to hustle his ass off is going to give you a lot at this level. And it's kind of amazing how simple that sounds. And it's not meant to be condescending. It's just meant to be realistic.
Mark Dolezaj made a great career out of it. Christoph Ongenat made a great career out of it. We have utilized those guys very well over the years. And college basketball needs someone like that.
Yeah.
The level of talent team wide it's a step down from, obviously it's a step down from the NBA, but it's a step down globally from the NBA, whereas you can make up some of that with pure hustle and just grit. And gritty guys are, they don't come around that often.
Now, as much as we might want to continue talking about and complaining about the men's basketball team, I think that this last topic that we should spend some time on deserves a lot more time and a lot more attention than maybe some people think. And it's the state of the women's basketball team at Syracuse. Especially if you didn't know, Syracuse women's basketball is not off to a great start. It's 2-3 on the season, losses to St. Joseph's, Maryland, and most recently this past Wednesday, UAlbany, when UAlbany hit a 3 in the dying seconds of the game to take the lead and eventually the win. This is a Syracuse team that unfortunately no longer has Deja Fair, who bailed them out of a lot of situations. But the main focus is in the press conference. This past game on Wednesday, Felicia Leggett-Jack went off and mainly was talking about the attendance issues that have plagued Syracuse women's basketball pretty much for the entirety of its program history.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look good. I'm going to pull up her opening statement, which was tweeted out by Brent Axe. If you are watching on our stream on YouTube, Twitch, or Twitter, you can read along with the opening statement that is pretty poignant from Coach Felicia Leggett-Jack.
It's a lot. I wrote about this on my Substack because it's actually really funny because when it happened, I saw that people were talking about it, and I immediately read it and started kind of spinning my wheels on it. And then the next morning I was walking to the gym and literally wrote it from my phone because it's just one of these things that, Christian, to your point, when Sean Farrell, reporter for the Bergen County Record, originally was writing for News Magician back when we were at school together, he had the women's basketball beat when Quentin Hillsman was running this program to a Final Four appearance and a loss against UConn. And it was the same deal where at most you were getting 1,500, 2,000 fans into the building, if that. And the university tried a lot of different things. They do double headers with the student section. They did situations where if you came to a women's game, you got priority for big men's basketball games because obviously the men's program was good at that time as well. And nothing really stuck. And so one of the comments that came out of this was Quentin Hillsman was one of the guys that proposed, let's move these games out of the Carrier Dome. And that was something that the university got really prickly about. And again, without, you can go read the whole thing. I'm not going to talk about a Substack that I wrote, but it kicked off what allowed me to see was a really prickly relationship that SUA has when you question its decisions around women's sports and the perceived lack of support. And when I read this, I think we can all kind of dive into this from a variety of different reasons, but my take on this has been and would continuously be, this was a bad loss. Coaches after bad losses love to deflect from the bad loss by talking about something else that's not going well at the program. College football, it's you talk about NIL. Hi, Dino Babers. If it's if it's like college basketball, you talk about one and done rules, and you talk about kids who don't stick around the program long enough. If you're in women's basketball or in women's sports, talking about the lack of support is obviously pretty common. And in this situation, I know from my experiences with SU athletics, women's sports is not a priority in the same way that men's basketball especially is, where the decision was made, oh, you guys get to share the Mello Center. That's the extent of our investment in this program. So I don't know what's going on with the program now, but I read this as Felicia Legette-Jack is frustrated at things happening behind the scenes and use this as a moment to take some shots after a bad loss, because now we're not talking about how badly she coached the Albany game or how bad this team looks without Deja Fair. We're talking about supporting women's basketball in Syracuse. Again, that's my take on it, and obviously other people have a lot of different opinions on that.
And to one point, yes, because this is an issue. It's an issue, but it's a significant issue also that at some point was going to have to be brought up eventually by the coach and leader of the program. Because even last year, you still didn't get the same support last year. Because again, this has been a issue for the program the entire season. But at the same time, I get your point, Andy, that like the only reason why we're talking about women's basketball on this podcast right now is because Felicia Legette-Jack made these comments. Because I don't think the three of us would have really cared about a loss or win against Albany if these comments were not made. Which, you could see that in a variety of different ways. But now that she's made these comments, now there's a bit of attention, and we can, like Andy just did, analyze why she made these comments and if it's a reason for deflection or a deeper rooted issue that it can't just kind of been bubbling and she's been waiting to release it for quite some time. So no. I mean, both issues deserve attention, which is the attendance has been bad and has continued to be bad ever since the women's basketball program went back into the dome, or ever since it started, and then also that this team is just not nearly as good as Felicia Legette-Jack's previous teams, especially with the talent level that's there right now.
Yeah, and that's something I think, Christian, I believe you and I, when we had Sam Federman on earlier, he had touched on the fact that this team is likely going to be a large regression from prior. So we knew this was coming. I think and fully support what FLJ is saying in this statement, because if this is something, we always go with the things can be two things. This is both of those things. This is something that's been bubbling up for a while, I'm sure. Like, you don't just come up with you don't come up with a quote like this off the cuff without there having something behind it. Like, there's definitely something more deep-seated in this than, it's, I just said something after a bad loss. Like, there's things that are happening. I guarantee it after something like this. But also, like, we knew this team wasn't going to be that good, and this is partly her deflecting from that, like you mentioned. It's both of the things are true. Like both points both of you guys made are spot on as to what's going on here. And who knows what we're going to see for the rest of this season. But like the stat line from that game is basically Georgia Woolley trying to shoot a lot, and that's it. Like everybody else was under 10 points. No, sorry, Verjao was over on 7 of 13 shooting. But like there's, I don't know. It's a weird box score, and there's a lot of people playing a lot of minutes with some productivity, and I don't know what she can do to turn the team around, and I also don't know what the hell they can do to turn the attendance issue around.
I mean, attendance issue wise, I've brought this up so many times on this podcast, and I think it bears repeating because of what Andy said with what they've tried in the past with Syracuse tickets for this women's basketball program. And from what Andy mentioned, it was a lot bundling it with men's basketball tickets, which can work to an extent, but as we've seen, not a huge extent. So why don't you look at the minor league teams that are in town also who get good attendance, or at least decent enough attendance where you could theoretically rise the attendance of your women's basketball program? The Crunch and the Mets. The Mets, don't draw all the time, but they've got a good amount of games where they do draw, especially even the non-rehab assignment games. The Mets still draw a I would say a respectable amount of fans. Doesn't fill their stadium, but it's respectable. And same with the Crunch. The Crunch always draw a very respectable amount of fans at the War Memorial. So why can't you follow their spotlines and guidelines of, trying to draw fans? Why don't you create more of a minor league model of trying to draw fans, of creating other ticket packages and incentives for groups and young families to come and spend a day at the Dome? Because that's what's going to not only get those butts in the seats, but you have a higher percentage chance of retaining that fandom and for those people to come back to another game. Because I guarantee you, some of the Cub stats that Steve brought going to want to come back to another Syracuse game. And
that's true. Actually, most of them said that.
So why can't you do that with Girl Scouts for women's basketball? You have one school day already, but it's in early January. Like, why can't you do more things with other groups that are not as large as the surrounding Syracuse school districts? Why can't you do more to incentivize groups, especially younger groups, that come to the Dome and help you with your attendance program to start building that foundation now so that it pays off later?
Well, and that's kind of a conundrum on that as well, of like the way their scheduling is, it's very non-conducive to people doing that. Like my niece is a 12-year-old that plays basketball in Albany. Every time they come out here, they want to go to an SU basketball game, but they're all on like a Tuesday or like there's nothing on the weekend that they can go to. It's all a random Tuesday or Thursday or whenever they can get the court. It's like, make it so that there's a game on a day that people can attend when you're trying to build the fan base.
And this kind of goes back to, again, chicken egg situation with why, if playing at the Dome is causing these headaches because you're working around the men's schedule and the football schedule and the event schedule of the Dome, why go somewhere else where it gives you more scheduling flexibility, even if it's not, not the Dome.
Right.
But again, like part of this issue is because, and I think if you talk to Syracuse about it, they'll say, look, we've tried to do different events, but our ticket team is really small and we are just understaffed and under-resourced, and we do what we can. And Steve's rolling his eyes right now, and I agree with that sentiment, because you look at the going WNBA here, the New York Liberty just won the championship after they were bought by the Tsai family 4 years ago. Prior to that, they were playing up in Westchester in front of crowds of 1,500, same size that the women's team gets now. And now they're selling out Barclays Center, a full NBA arena. They do that not just because the team is good. They do that because as a Nets partial season ticket holder, I have a ticket rep. I was asking about this, and he said, like, look, I can sell you a package, but I don't do anything for the Liberty. The Liberty have a completely separate team in charge of working with their ticket holders to say, this is a different demographic of fan. This is a different group of people who want different things. We can't just copy and paste the Nets strategy and say that it's going to work with the women because we live in the same city and we share the same facility. And that is, again, like Christian and Steve's reaction, if you're watching on the live stream here, is of course it is stupid, water is wet. But for Syracuse, that's not been the approach that they've ever had to this. You've got SIDs covering multiple sports. You've got ticket staffers working on multiple sports. That's not the SID's problem. That's a Syracuse structural problem. This is a Syracuse athletics saying we don't value this problem, is not worth us figuring out a way to solve it by throwing more money at it, which is telling, and I think is ultimately the root of all of these things that we're talking about here, where you cannot put the onus on, like, this is where I do think that the statement was a little bit incorrect. You can't put the onus on the fans for doing something that they're just not going to do. Syracuse, like, look at what's happening with men's attendance in both basketball and football. When the team is bad, people just don't show up. Syracuse is a professional sports town where it is not based around the tradition of going to the game. The game is a spectacle, an event, and it needs to be worth it in some way, shape, or form.
Right. We're a Northeast town. Like it's not even, I guess I get your model after the pro sports town thing, but it's a fickle fan base. Like I was up there, and Christian can attest, well, both of you can attest to this. 40 and rainy on the quad wasn't great when things started. Like we're not an area where, no matter what, rain or shine, there's going to be people out there hours before the game, tailgating, doing their whole thing. Like it is what it is. We go to basketball games in the dead of Syracuse winter. Like you got to find something to bring people there. And for years, for the men, it was, hey, they're good. Now, the last 10 years, we haven't even had that. And attendance has suffered because of it. So what do you do? How do you get creative? What are you doing to get those new investments in the seats? Football turns it around because of Fran and turning it around. Like I'm sure next year there's going to be more season ticket holders than this year. But like, what are these other teams doing to further this along?
I think that it's a really good point. And I do think that there's obviously, to Christian's point, we've just spent the last 20 minutes talking about women's basketball and what SU as a program needs to do to support SU women's basketball more, and not talking about how there might be some coaching issues and maybe it was built the whole plane out of one successful player. That might also be very true here. But all of this is to say, this week, the head coach of women's basketball was on the ESPN weekly drive time radio programs. This worked. It did what it needed to do for the program and for the narrative around the program, which again, I think is really interesting. I think it's really important. And yeah, Christian is pulling up what is the most important thing, which is the follow-up apology statement where she says, I didn't mean to call our fans bad, or I didn't mean to offend the people who actually do show up to these games. I'm just kind of,
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
What I will say to give basketball analysis, Georgia Woolley is JJ Starling, just with a bit more 3-point shooting. Like, does she have high scoring ability? Yes, but it's at a wildly inefficient rate that is not going to carry a team.
I mean, I looked at that box score from the Albany game, and it is like they only took, I think, 13 threes, and they hit them at about a 35% clip, which is about as good as you're going to get. And then every other shot is coming from the floor. and they're shooting those at like a 40% clip. I'm sorry, if that's going to be your offense, you need way more shots, and they need to be going in a lot more often than 40%, or you have to start shooting a lot more threes. And turns out, to Christian's point, the women's team might have the same issues the men's do, as in they do not have the people to make those 3-point shots, and the women's team does not have an Eddie Lampkin to bail them out.
Verishaw's doing her best, I'll be honest.
I think that's, again, I'm concerned not to use women to talk about men again, but I think that both teams have a problem where you just can't rely on a big body in the middle to hold up over a full season. Not when you're playing 2 or 3 games a week, not when they can only play 25, 30 minutes once we start getting to crunch time. Like,
Yeah,
this is a challenge.
Yeah, look how much that women's basketball team suffered and had to adjust when Verishal was injured last year.
Right.
Yep.
Weirdly though, thinking about it on the flip side, FLJ's comments did kind of do something we probably should have been doing prior and talk more about the women's team, but also has intrigued me to watch some of these games now, which there was a stretch, when I think, Christian, you mentioned when Q was kind of on the up before things went completely off the rails. That's a discussion for a whole different podcast. But
old Ole Miss assistant coach Quentin Hillsman, just kind of throwing that out there. Oh,
he somehow ended up back in the game. Yeah.
That entire Ole Miss coaching staff at the entire university is something to behold.
Like how Joel Quinville is probably going to get an NFL head coaching job very, very soon.
There's just a lot of things that are happening that is, you can get a lot of rope with that. Anyways, yes, Steve, sorry. had to call up that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just saying there was a point where when Q was doing what he was doing and it was working, that I was tuning in pretty regularly. And I'm admitting here that I'm completely guilty of the if you build it, they will come type thing of when they were good, I was watching them. When they weren't, I stopped. But this has kind of got me thinking, you know what? Maybe I'll tune in and see what's going on. So, I mean, maybe it also worked. Like, no press is bad press.
Is it like fighting in hockey? Like you need something to do in order to fire the team up?
Hey, I've heard some very, very strange halftime speeches from coaches. So,
look, on that note, I have done the migration. I've moved from Twitter over to Blue Sky, and there was a great thing from our friend Jason Kirk, who is, college football writer at the original Blogosphere. And he posted the question, why don't more bad teams just hire absolute weirdos and see what happens? To which I quote tweeted and said, I think this is what Syracuse did. We just didn't realize it until halfway through the season. And the response from Spencer Hall was an emphatic, winners get washed.
I love that Spence is on the train.
I'm here to just let everybody know that our Syracuse football is 8-3, and we are fun and happy again. So even though basketball is not happy and fun right now, football is, and that's something to take away from this show and from the weekend.
How strange is that to say on this podcast for as long as we've been doing it? What is our happy place? Oh, football. Oh, okay. I'll take that.
Well, to be fair, we haven't had a happy place for a while.
Oh, yeah, we've just had no happy place. You're right. I'll give you that.
Yeah. Wait until, really what we're going to need is lacrosse is going to need to come back in and really surprise some people. So,
Not if I have anything to say about it.
Oh, jeez. Speaking of Cornell, that's who our basketball team takes on next. That'll be interesting.
It's good.
Is this a Cornell of old, or is this a Cornell of recent years where they actually don't suck at basketball?
Both, I think.
Sweet.
We'll have to ask Sam about that, who is watching the Cornell, I believe, playing Iona tomorrow. The former Fighting Rick Pitino's.
Cornell is 210th in Ken Palm.
Okay.
Syracuse is 101st in Ken Pom.
That's a 100-point gap. I like that.
Yeah, but also Syracuse is 100th and first in Ken Pom.
Okay, semantics. And also, yes, good point on that.
Oh, this seems like a great time to end this week's edition of the Disloyal Idiots podcast. Thank you, as always, to Christian and Steve for jumping on and setting all this whole thing up and keeping it running. I'm just here to talk in my parents' basement, literally this week. Thank you again for everybody who likes and subscribed on the podcast platform of choice. You help us trick the AI into extending the Ottoman Empire. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in on our live streams, whether it's the Fans First Sports Network YouTube page or our YouTube page or our Twitch, the Twitter on Fans First Sports Network. It really does mean a lot when you all tune in live with us on Sunday nights when we do this at 8 o'clock-ish every Sunday night-ish. Also, again, thank you to Home Field Apparel. Make sure you go and check out their Black Friday sale, 30% off everything on site. If you do somehow miss their Black Friday sale, NUNES24, NUNES24, for 15% off your first order at Home Field Apparel. I am going to go rest my voice that has now been screaming way too much this past weekend. I am going to hope that Steve does not have an army of 75 small children sitting upstairs ready to recite the Scout anthem. And I am here hoping that Christian is able to get some goddamn sleep. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening. Go Orange.
Go Orange.
Shout out to using the substitution process to deceive the defense.